Hello everyone. There has been really an incredible amount of interest in the Boxster program that we've put together. So I wanted to run through a deck that we have on this program, which I'll also make available via our website, just to explain a little bit about the thought process behind it, the components in the Repower kit, and what the end vehicle actually looks like, and a bit about the build process as well. So to really kick things off, I suppose we should explain the name Boxster and why we came to that. So when we were looking at this, and we're big Porsche fans, so when we were looking at this, what we could do with the 986, which is a great platform, but to put a lot more power into it and really modernise the vehicle and give it really more relevance in modern performance car world, we looked at some engine repower options, and the obvious one was Audi, Volkswagen 06A 20 valve. 06A being the later internal water pump 20 valve engine, obviously turbocharged, so potential for as much power as you could really want. And of course that led us straight down the path of, well, Boxster was a Boxer engine roadster, Boost, obviously we all know what Boost is, put the two together and you get Boxster. And Boxster was the working title, if you like, for this that we've carried forward into the rest of the project. So the goals of this project were: can we put 500 horsepower into a Boxster? Can you do it reliably? And can you do it in a really non-intrusive way? Because road legality, and certainly within the United Kingdom, we have an organisation called the DVLA who are responsible for, you would say, vehicle legality and management, and keeping it legal within the remit of their rule set was really important. So why we did this: 986 Boxster, modern classic, great car, awesome car, superb balance. Again, we'll make this deck available, so I'm not going to narrate it to you guys watching this, but rather just give a bit of an overview. So we picked 06A 20 valve because it's generationally similar. It comes from a similar period in time. What that means is that for the most part, it has some commonality with what's in the Boxster originally in terms of electronic supplier, sensor sets, certain other things that make this really seamless. But the obvious challenge is how to get the engine in there, how to get it working, how to do the integration with rest of vehicle, etc., etc. So we decided that we were going to do 06A 20 valve, and for all of the reasons that we've just listed, we were going to put in a 986 Boxster. And in the early days of this, we were really considering, can we do this as a kit? But there wasn't full intent to do it as a kit until a little bit further through the project, which I'll touch on later on. So the thought process behind this: a classic repowered 06A 20 valve and a Boxster. I know a few people have mentioned, isn't that a little bit blasphemous? Well, we don't think so. And again, I'm not going to dictate the slide to you, but Volkswagen, Audi Group and Porsche have a long history, and it goes back almost to the very start of Porsche. Well, I think it is the very start of Porsche, depending on what you decide is the start. So there's been lots of Audi by Porsche, there's been a few Porsche by Audi, and we really see this as sort of following that history and that history of those companies working together to deliver high performance, interesting vehicles, and that's exactly what Boxster is. It's a higher performance 986. So what's a fit kit? Well, when we set out down this path, it was really clear that you can get the engine in there, no problem at all. The integration is relatively straightforward, and we've documented that within the kit. But to explain what a repower is a little bit, a repower is an automotive term that essentially refers to a process of changing the original power unit without changing the rest of the vehicle significantly. So you're not sort of building a highly modified car, you are getting as close to one engine out, next engine in as it can possibly be. And the term repower is used quite often in industrial processing, plant applications, in off-highway and similar, where swapping to a more modern power unit in a already established vehicle is not an uncommon thing. You know, you may do it for emissions compliance, or you may do it for more power, you may do it for operating at different altitude or similar. But it's a pretty common frame of reference within those areas. And a fit kit, again, is a pretty standard automotive term. It essentially revolves around having a kit of parts which allow you to perform that repower in a pretty easy way, i.e. you haven't got to design, validate, draw or manufacture anything yourself. You can do it with the components that are in that kit, and with anything else that may be required is standard off-the-shelf components, either existing OEM parts or aftermarket parts of a pretty sort of generic form, i.e. straight lengths of hose and similar. So we developed the Boxster fit kit around that ethos, which is to provide everything which is difficult or challenging to engineer yourself. That's included in the kit, and really reduce the complexity and difficulty of fitting an 06A20 valve into a Boxster. All of the parts which are standard off the shelf are not in the kit, because it's far more likely that you can source those locally at arguably a better price, certainly if you're outside of the UK, than we could ship them to you for. And the items that are, shall we say, left to your choice are very simple. When we spoke to quite a few owners that would be interested in doing this, they all had different ideas of what they wanted from the engine package. So that specifically opened up the areas of exhaust manifold, turbocharger, downpipe, and to a point, charge cooling system. So the kit is designed around providing everything you need to get the engine in there. The enhanced fit kit, there are two versions of it. The enhanced fit kit also includes a build manual and lots of other parts that you would require, like flywheel, etc. But what it does is leave it open up to the builder what they want to do with regards to turbocharger. So you can run a completely standard KO3 or KO4 turbocharger. The kit supports that low mount position, and then of course you just create a downpipe accordingly to link that turbo to whatever exhaust system you want to run. Aftermarket, modified standard back box, anything along those lines. But we also support, via the design of the kit and the position of the engine, larger top mount turbochargers. The validation prototype and what's shown in this photo is a GT3076R, which is quite a big, physically big turbocharger. So you're not really going to be limited on space to make an awful lot of power, i.e. you can fit as big a turbo as you would ever want. Charge cooling side, again up to the builder, but PWR UK will shortly be providing a Boxster specification charge cooler kit, which includes a 6x6 water air intercooler, as well as the heat exchanger, etc. The heat exchanger is designed to fit onto the standard 986 rad pack as an original aircon condenser would. So that works particularly well because it's completely flawless in terms of fit and mounting locations, etc. So the base vehicle, we looked at this really closely, and there's a bit of a balancing act, certainly in UK and Europe to a point, that there was an emissions homologation change in 2001 or 2000, which means that anything pre-2000 you don't have to run homologated emissions components on. The performance of the emission controlling part just has to meet the standards of the original parts that were fitted to the vehicle, i.e. you've got to better meet the same emission standard that the vehicle originally had, but you don't have to re-homologate the vehicle for it, which is a really big point because DVLA and other agencies around the world are becoming really very concerned around what's being done in the aftermarket and modified car scene with regards to removal of emission systems. So it was really important to us that we could engineer this to support the original factory emissions with an 06A20 valve in there. So we'll cover that a little bit later, how that's done, but essentially there is an option for a non-homologated but completely road legal for pre-2001 catalytic brick or catalytic converter, which can be fitted very easily into the exhaust system, and that gives you an emissions compliant vehicle to the emissions compliance that was there originally. However, the caveat to this is that it only applies essentially to pre-2000 Boxsters. So we designed this kit around the 2.5 litre, which was the only Boxster at that point in time. So the 2.5 litre 97 to 99 986 Boxster without air conditioning and without cruise control. If you want to run aircon, you can do. You can run an or electromagnetic driven or electronic aircon compressor, which is quite common on EVs now, but there's many aftermarket kits that allow you to run them on something like a 986. You would use the other side of the rad pack that doesn't have the charge cooler heat exchanger on it to run a standard aircon condenser. They're absolutely fine with one aircon condenser. Certainly in sort of most European and up to sort of 35-degree ambient climates, they're absolutely fine with a single aircon condenser. So you can run aircon if you want, but it won't be engine driven unless you want to do some re-engineering. And it's not really possible to implement cruise control on a repowered vehicle because the modern level of functional safety dictates that the original installation was not compliant. So if you're using items of the original installation, it won't meet modern functional safety standards. What you do around that realistically is entirely up to you, but from our perspective, we developed this as a functionally safe conversion. So we are working from a position that buy a base car that doesn't have air conditioning, and then everything is pretty straightforward from there. It doesn't have cruise control. So radically altered vehicle compliance. Obviously, this only applies within the UK. There are similar rules and regulations around Europe. They're not the same as the UK, and as you go further afield into the US and similar, that's determined on a state-by-state basis. Some states you'll be absolutely fine to do whatever you want with your car, and some states can be quite restrictive. So knowing what is going on in local market, if you're not in the UK, is important because we engineered this to be UK legal, i.e. we do not fall foul of the DVLA's radically altered vehicles rules. Radically altered vehicle is useful. It provides a path to essentially re-homologate a vehicle if it's been significantly changed. However, as part of this repower, there are no modifications to the monocoque. So the monocoque is completely standard in every way. So where we needed threaded bosses, for example, to hold tanks or elements of it, those bosses exist in the original monocoque. Everything is bolt on to the original monocoque, and the parts which need to be modified, which we'll cover later, to allow for engine fit, are all bolt-on parts, i.e. the original monocoque is unmodified. You may want, depending on what turbocharger you're using and similar, to remove the original bay fan bracket from the engine bay. That's spot welded. So if you remove the spot welds with a spot weld drill and do not puncture the skin of the monocoque around those spot welds, it still remains legal. If you drill holes in it, however, or fit rivnuts to things or weld things to it or cut things from it, technically that's a modified monocoque, and immediately then you're into IVA. So really important that you don't drill lots of holes in it if you're in the UK. Other than that, because everything is bolt on, you can do what you want as long as it still emits, i.e. meets emissions. So a little bit about 20-valve engine availability, because when we started to look at what was a good engine option, we looked at some modern stuff, 2.3 EcoBoost and similar. We also looked at some interesting stuff from rest of world. So one of the Attico Cherry 4-cylinder turbo engines that's used in China and Far East market. Really interesting engine, but a little bit too tall, likewise for EcoBoost. So when we looked at what was generationally similar, we looked at 20-valve first, obviously. 20-valve's got a great history, not just in tuner market, but in motorsport as well, and lots of other applications. But we needed to make sure that it was available, i.e. you can get one if you want to build one and you want to do this kit. What I can say is that 20-valve availability, 06A 20-valve availability is absolutely fine. There are many, many, many perfectly serviceable core units available from all the normal places. There are still new cylinder heads that can be purchased. There's various other large cast components that can still be purchased as new parts through Volkswagen Audi Group supply chain. And of course, there's an incredibly good aftermarket for these engines. So you can easily get an engine. It's not a lot of money for a core unit, and you can build it to be pretty much whatever you want because the aftermarket is so good for it. So moving on now to what may be a bit more interesting, shall we say, or certainly a bit more interesting for those that are really wondering how this is done. Well, this is the engine installation. So when we set out to do this, we drew up various items into CAD, we 3D scanned a 20 valve, and we started to look at, okay, how are we going to fit this in there? How do you make it nice? How do you make it very OEM? The gearbox side of things is really straightforward because the gearbox in the 2.5 litre Boxster shares the same bell housing pattern as a 20 valve. In the Porsche installation, they do use some slightly different mounting holes to what's used in the 20 valve, but essentially the bell housing pattern is common. It will bolt straight on. There are some differences required around clutch, flywheel, etc., which we have covered in the kit, and that gives you a really strong installation. So one of the biggest issues with using gearbox adapter plates or gearbox interface plates to adapt between bell housing patterns is a loss of stiffness in the overall assembly. So doing it this way, you're benefiting from all the OEM work that was done around the stiffnesses of those joined components, i.e. you're using the same pickup points, you're using the same bell housing pattern, there's no changes in it, it's an OEM installation. So then we looked at what we can do around the front mount. And the front mount was not a challenge, but it needed to be done in a certain way to allow the package to really work. So one of the most important things was, can you access the belts? So when you've done this conversion through the original bulkhead window that's in a 986 Boxster, can you get in there? Can you change alternator, power steering pump? Can you do an auxiliary belt replacement with all this in place? So we designed with that in mind, and access is actually really good. It's no more difficult to work on than the original car with the M96 in it. We also looked at how do we get really good stiffness in here, because we knew that we were going to have to essentially create this system where the engine sat on it rather than hung off it. So in the original 06A installation, in something like an Audi S3 or Golf GTI, where the engine is located on the engine mount, it hangs off a mount rather than sits on a mount. So we looked at this, and the first part we really looked at was how to adapt out from the 06A block into a flat surface that was suitable for the Boxster, i.e. we needed to get to a vertical plane, which we did with a single piece machined assembly that picks up all of the original hard points in the block that Volkswagen Audi Group used to mount the engine on. So we know that they're lovely and strong and the right distances and the right stiffnesses, and we're not picking up on anything that would stress the block in a particularly bad way. We then created a tombstone mount, as we call it, which sits vertically, and that essentially takes the space between the original Porsche hardpoints on the monocoque and the new upper engine mounting. And what that does is give us the bolt pattern we need to pick up the original Porsche engine mount. The original Porsche engine mount, we run 180 degrees inverted. We do that to create clearance around the bottom of the tombstone mount for coolant lines. If you were to do it the other way, because of the shape of the 06A and where you need the mount and lots of other things, it becomes very tight to get coolant lines past it nicely. Inverting that mount obviously reduces the distance between the two lower points. It gives you some room then to run the coolant lines either side. There's no real impact in doing that. The mount is actually stronger bolted to the tombstone mount than it was bolted to the 06A engine, bolted to the M96 engine, just because of how it's bolted and how it sits on a number of protruding bosses on the M96 engine, whereas it sits across much more surface area here. So that's all pretty straightforward. We do have a small anti-rotation mount as well that picks up from the sump, just to stiffen the lower assembly as much as possible. That also makes a really convenient carrying point for boost transfer pipe or boost pipe across the bottom of the engine bay. The 06A engine itself is originally designed to be a transverse installation in S3, Golf, etc. But there are numerous OEM components for a longitudinal installation, where it was originally used in Audi A4. You can use the original A4 sump and oil pickup and the original A4 inlet manifold to create a longitudinal version of the engine. It all just bolts on. It's super simple. Those parts are available really cheaply. Both aftermarket and OEM parts are not expensive. And of course, in the case of the sump, that means that you've got a fully OEM durability oil solution or oiling solution for the engine in a longitudinal installation. So again, you can have some confidence that the oiling is good. It's not going to have issues under hard acceleration or braking or cornering. Its durability and robustness as a oiling solution is exactly the same as it would have been in an Audi production car. So that covers a little bit about the installation itself and what that looks like. What we were really aiming for, and this of course was to make it pretty much like an OEM road car, just with a lot more power. We've covered a lot of this, so again, we'll make this deck available to download, so I won't go through it line by line, but the key driver in it was to get the mechanical integration really nice, i.e. you can take out an M96 and you can put in an 06A and it goes in on the same bolt holes and it goes in on the same mounts, and there is very little else that you need to do in terms of physically getting the engine in there. So the engine mounting system, we've discussed what that looks like. Here you can see it with the inverted 986 standard engine mount on there, and a bit more detail on the assembly. Just to cover off the bolt-on component aspect as well, in order to fit the engine and get clearance and avoid a clash at the rear of the engine with the top rear section of the 986 engine bay, it's necessary to drop the engine slightly. The Repower kit supports the 25mm reduction in crank centre line over the M96. In order to achieve that, there are 2 or 3 technically modifications that need to be done. One on each gearbox mount and one on the original crossmember. As we covered earlier, these are all bolt-on. So the key thing with bolt-on is that we don't get into modifying the chassis or any other elements of it. The Repower kit contains a number of laser cut and folded plates or weld-ins to help this procedure and make it as straightforward as possible. There is no real complexity to it. It's perfectly achievable if you have even a really basic like gasless MIG welder or something available to you. Alternatively, it's a low-cost thing for a local fabrication company to do. When we looked at how to do this, we 3D scanned the original components. We did some FEA work on understanding what the stiffnesses were of the original components and what we needed to do in terms of weldings and similar to either end up at the same strength or end up a little bit better. In the case of the gearbox mounts, we've gone a little bit overkill perhaps, but we've put plenty of stiffness into them versus the standard ones. Predominantly because we know that people will be putting, getting on for twice the torque, arguably, through these that would be present in the original installation. The crossmember itself uses a welding section which is about 2.5 times thicker than the original material. We do that because we reduce the cross-sectional area of the crossmember itself around the lower section of it underneath the gearbox to get clearance. So beefing that top thickness up and those side thicknesses up gives us the stiffness back into it. So there's no impact in terms of strength or durability of these components when modified. And what we really wanted to do this as a laser cut and fold element that's supplied with the kit rather than just a plan diagram or similar, to make sure that those stiffnesses and those strengths were exactly as they were in the original vehicle, if not a little bit better. We should just say as well that there's 2 versions of our kit, a fundamental and an enhanced kit. The fundamental includes just the components we've just seen, so the weld-ins for bolt-on component modification and the front engine mount. What we're going to cover off now is the additional parts that are in the enhanced kit. The enhanced kit is really designed for those that want to get as close to a sort of kit car style book build as possible, because it includes a build manual that lists absolutely everything you could need to know and want to know to build one of these. Whereas the fundamental kit is really based around those that just want to be able to get the motor in the chassis and they want to do everything else themselves. So focusing now on the parts that are in the enhanced kit. Transmission and clutch, excuse me. We obviously retain the original and modified Boxster transmission. However, we need to support a bit more power. We didn't want to go for a clutch system which was going to be uncomfortable to drive on the road or difficult, so no paddle type clutches, no really expensive multi-plate type clutches. So what we came up with was a flywheel assembly that consists of a single mass, relatively lightweight but not super lightweight, so it's difficult to drive, flywheel that takes a 240mm OEM Audi RS4 clutch. That RS4 clutch is a completely standard part, and it also shares a release bearing pattern with the original Boxster. Ergo, all of the clutch actuation elements within the gearbox remain standard. The clutch itself, in terms of friction and pressure plate, is standard, and you just use the flywheel to adapt between the two. That 240mm clutch is good for about 325 foot-pounds, which is pretty much the limit of the 5-speed gearbox. So it's a really robust, nice solution, drives like a standard road car, but all of it bolt-on. You use a Bosch Volkswagen Audi OEM starter. The starter is nothing special. It's Audi A4, Passat, I think common with Golf as well, and various others. It's bolt compatible with the original Boxster transmission, and all the details of that are provided in the manual. You use the original shift cables. The only modification to those is the routing. So they route down the side of the engine rather than over the top of the inlet manifold, as per in the M96 installation. And if you are going to be making big power, a limited slip diff is really worthwhile, and Quaife produced an ATB, which is a direct fit, and that's a highly recommended item if you're going over 330 horsepower. Fuel system, you can use the standard pump up to 300 horsepower. Going over 300 horsepower, we supply in the kit a drop-in fuel pump conversion. It's a much larger Walbro pump, good for about 500 horsepower, a little bit over 500 horsepower at 4-bar base pressure. Really straightforward to fit. Goes in the original fuel pump housing and swirl pot setup, and probably about the easiest thing to fit that there is, because it's literally one out, one in. One of the points that people bring up, have brought up a lot around this, is what's the electronics integration like and how does it work? It's actually pretty straightforward, and the manual in the enhanced kit details everything you need to do to modify a standard ME 7.5 20 valve engine harness to be plug and play with a Boxster. And when we say plug and play, we mean completely plug and play. There is no modification at all on the chassis side of the vehicle. So all the electronics on the chassis side of the vehicle are exactly as per. We supply in the kit a specific temperature sensor. That temperature sensor feeds the dash pack in the original Boxster cluster and the ECU with the correct resistance of sensor element to drive those both accurately. So that's a modification that fits in the original location. It's also reduced in height for clearance, but it makes this super simple because standard dash works and lots of other things work exactly as they were, including the check engine light. For powers up to 350 horsepower or so, you can use an OEM VAG ME 7.5 ECU, which is a really low cost solution and obviously nice OEM drivability. You do need to retain a MAF with that. There's not really a good MAFless solution for it, so you're limited to 350-ish because you run out of MAF there, even on the larger mass airflow sensors that are available. The ECU will need a modification, which is a really common modification that is really well supported for using this engine in other engine conversions like Mark II Golf and Corrado, etc., which is a de-immob, as it's known, immobiliser remove essentially, and it removes the immobiliser element of the original 7.5 ECU. For the Boxster, the immobiliser is a multi-part immobiliser. Only one part of it is the engine ECU. So the vehicle will still immobilise correctly in terms of various aspects of it. It just won't on the ECU side. So it's up to you whether you are comfortable and happy with that. But realistically, for a 25-year-old vehicle, as the 986 Boxster is now, it will still immobilise in a way that it will be almost as difficult to steal as it was originally. So that original ME 7.5 integration is pretty straightforward. However, if you're going for 400, 500 horsepower, there is an amazing aftermarket solution called Ignitron, which is a superb aftermarket ECU and really shouldn't be confused with, should we say, more common plug-and-play aftermarket, where it's an adapter harness to a standard aftermarket ECU. Ignitron was developed around running the 06A 20 valve and being a direct replacement for ME 7.5. It does everything the standard ECU does, but it gives you opportunity to run mathless, so you can run speed density via map sensor. It also gives you a lot of other options, a lot of other cool calibration options and similar, which it's highly recommended to look at Ignitron. And realistically, even on cars that you're not shooting for really big power on, makes a lot of sense to go down that route, because it gives you a whole lot of functionality which just doesn't exist in the standard ECU. The only other point to touch on regarding electronics installation is throttle pedal. All the 06A 20 valves are drive-by-wire. The original 2.5 litre cars were cable throttle. However, there's a really neat bolt-in solution for this, which retains all the functional safety that was done by Porsche, which is the 996 Carrera 4 and later Boxsters had a drive-by-wire throttle pedal. It's a direct bolt-in on the 2.5 litre cars. It's readily available. There's loads of used ones in the usual places, or it's not that expensive to order new. And that will give you a functionally safe OEM drive-by-wire throttle pedal. Then it's just a case of running 6 wires up the car or down the car in the Boxster's case to the ECU. Again, really well detailed in the manual and a super quick thing to do. It's like an hour and a half maximum to do that. And you've got a OEM level drive-by-wire pedal solution. You can, of course, if you want to, run a pedal position sensor off the throttle cable that terminates in the engine bay from the original installation, but we'd really recommend that you use the Porsche parts, buy the Porsche drive-by-wire parts, because they are functionally safe and they're a homologated part that has done all of the OEM durability and similar. And if you use that, you will never, ever, ever have a problem with pedal sensor. They're really, really reliable. So strong recommendation to use the Porsche pedal sensor parts. Intake charge cooling we touched on earlier. This is the PWR barrel that we recommend. It's a 6x6 unit, which means 6 inches long in terms of core length and 6 inches in diameter. So it's wide and short, really low pressure drop. It's good for up to around 500 horsepower. We recommend that you speak to PWR UK if you wish to use this, who can supply you a complete kit specifically for this booster conversion, which includes the heat exchanger to fit in the place of a 986 Air Conrad. Great kit, works superbly well. Very unlikely you will need more than that for most installations unless you're driving the turbo super, super hard and really outside of its efficiency zone. So exhaust system and catalytic converter, we touched on this earlier. The exhaust system in the Boxster is really quite straightforward. You can either use the original rear silencer, cut it open, which again is well documented in lots of places, and run a 3-inch system within that. It's quite easy to build a 3-inch system in it, and there are places in the UK that we can give you contact details for who will do that job for you. Then it's just a case of a downpipe that suits the turbo and a link pipe to that back box. The link pipe should carry the catalytic converter, and we position the catalytic converter in the same location as it is on the 987, so in the leading edge of the rear wheel arch, or leading edge of the rear section of the rear wheel arch. So inboard to the chassis, it's well ventilated there. There's already heat shielding in place around it. The cat that's recommended is a 200 cell metal matrix cat. There are several of them which are really viable. We can give you some recommendations if you need. But that cat, in circa sort of 475 horsepower rating, will work really well. It will light off quick. It will pass MOT emissions, and it's also slightly better than the original 2.5 litre car was when it's hot. So it's just a case of having a good engine calibration, which if you're using a standard ECU with an OEM calibration or an Ignitron with a good calibration, it will light off really well. It flows plenty. It'll be totally emissions compliant. So this is a bespoke bonus bomb, bespoke components bomb, which is in the kit. This is all of the unique items that are in it. This is all on the website, so I won't go through each one, but it's worth just calling out that we supply things like all of the Volkswagen Audi Group connectors that you will need to connect into the original ME 7.5 engine harness. We supply the flywheel, we supply all the weldings, the high flow fuel pump kit, etc. that we've just seen. So that's on the website. plenty to look at there, plenty in the kit, but it gives you every bespoke component that you're going to need to build one of these. So we're not guessing on how this goes together. We built a validation prototype, which you can see here, 77L, which is the validation prototype for this whole program. It's a 1999 2.5 Boxster, 17-inch wheeled car, little brakes, but we have had a massive amount of success with this. The build manual was written off the back of building this car, and there's lots of references back to it. This was, as we touched on at the start of this presentation, a 2.5 litre 1999 model year car. Came with electronics and extended leather and lots of lovely options on it. But this is the one that we have built and are in the process of validating up to 500 horsepower. We have another dyno session middle of next month on just to see quite how far we can go on that 3076 turbo. But that will get us really all of the validation that you guys could want to know that you can build this and the thermals will work and there's no crazy hotspots in the engine bay, etc. We've already clocked up a couple of thousand miles in this now, so that's looking pretty reasonable as a thing. So we're very happy to release the kit at this point. We've done some decent development mileage, we've done some high speed running, we've done some sort of 1-bar boost, decent power runs, etc. And we wrote the build manual off the back of this car. So again, you can have some confidence in what this is going to be like to build because we've built one. The obvious question now is, what else do we need to do? Do we want some cool dampers? Do we want some big brakes, etc.? You can do all of that, and there's loads of support for this in the aftermarket. So suspension-wise, Centre Gravity have a great 986 kit, which is done in partnership with Bilstein. There's also Öhlins, there's KW, there's a load of aftermarket options for dampers, all of which are pretty good. They range from pretty good to excellent, so it's just where on that scale you want to be. One thing to note is that a car with a booster Repower is about 45 kilos lighter than the original car. So be aware of spring rates on some, because they can have very high spring rates, which are not that suitable for UK roads, certainly. Braking system, you've got option of going to any Porsche caliper that will fit on the 986 uprights, which is really well documented online. There's loads of information on that. Brembo also do a GT 6-piston big kit. You'll need to go up a wheel size more than likely to accommodate it, but that's superb. Wheels, loads of options from AZ Racing and Braid, and 101 others as well, but those two are our recommendations. We've worked with AZ and Braid a lot over the years with really great success. And tyre, Pilot Sport 4 on Cup 2, both great options. Cup 2 if you're never going to use it in the wet, 4 and 4S if you want it to be more of a usable normal road car that can do some wet days. But both perfect tyres and loads of other good options as well, but those are the two that we generally work with. So what do you get out of it? What's the spec when it's done? Well, this is some of the testing that we've been doing. This is at 400 horsepower, so we're validating it's higher than that middle of next month, as I mentioned, but this gives you a bit of an idea of what it does. So 400 horsepower, massively traction limited because we're on a standard 17-inch turbo twist rear, so not a wide tyre. I think it's a 255 that's on it. We're 3.9 seconds to 60. Once it hooks up and we've got a bit of traction, 8.9 to 100. I think with some wider rears on it, you'd be doing much better than that. VMAX, top speed, really dependent on rev limit and how hard you want to string it out. And to a point, how big the turbo is, because you've got to hold the boost up at the high revs for that. But standard ratios allow for 189 mile an hour at 7250, which is a pretty normal tuned 20 valve rev limit. So I hope that was of interest. I think we've had a good 40 minutes there, so hopefully it wasn't too dry. But I hope that gives you a bit of background about Boxster, what we've really tried to achieve with the kit, what you guys can build with the kit, and how it really enables sort of 06A 20 valve to be a really simple choice as a power unit for Boxster. If you do want more information or you want to look at what's in the kit in more detail, We have a dedicated website for this kit, which is 986booster.com. And of course, you can contact us through there if you need any more information. Thanks ever so much. Bye for now.